Today, it's my privilege to be with Neal and JoAnn Peyton. And Neal and JoAnn, I've been thinking about this all week, and I'm so excited to have a chance to sit down. I feel like I know you folks. We've known each other for a long time, but I'm quite sure there's a lot about your story I don't know. And so, first of all, let me just say thanks for being willing to share, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thanks for letting us be a part of this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, where I think would be a good place for us to start today is to talk a little bit about where your faith journey started. Maybe you can take us back to your Genesis, and I know each of you probably has a starting point, but why don't we just start there? Talk a little bit about where it all started for you in your faith journey.
Okay, I grew up in a church back in Iowa. I was that's where my folks were from, and where we lived all of our lives until I went off to college and then off to the Army. But I was an active member of the church because my folks made sure I went to church every Sunday, although my dad didn't, because he ran a gas station and he had to open up the gas station and on Sunday. And so a lot of times he missed church. But mom's folks were really strong Christians and members of that particular church, and First Baptist Church of Sac City, Iowa. And so I grew up in the church. When I was 11, I think, I was baptized into membership of the church and stayed fairly active in the church until I went off to college. And then, like most kids, when they go off to college, they kind of break away from the church. Maybe it's a new environment, I'm not sure what. But when I was in the Army, well, actually, I was in college for 2 years and 1/4 studying forestry. I was going to be a forest ranger. Never had any doubt in my mind from 10th grade, but that's what I was going to be for the rest of my life, a forest ranger. And my brother, I had brothers who were twins, and one of them went into the Army, the other one didn't. And then later on, Jack, these brothers were twins, they were Jack and Jerry. Jack and I went into the Army at the same time because I decided that the government had a program where if you were in the Army and got out, you could get the GI Bill for your college education. So I said, well, I've been in college now 2 years. I can go into the Army. When I get out, it'll pay for the rest of my education. So that was my goal for going into the Army. And Jack and I went in together, went down to Fort Bliss, Texas, El Paso, Texas, for basic training. And while we were there, we were just active in the community a little bit, not in church, but just in the community. And about the 3rd week of basic training, he got sick. He was put on quarters for a week. So he missed a week of basic training. So at the end of that period of time, they moved him into a different outfit. So we were no longer together in the Army. I ended up going to Fort Benning, Georgia, in a 105 howitzer outfit. Jack ended up going to Chicago, Illinois, in a Nike guided missile outfit. While he was up there, he would go into town, and there he would go to the what is it?
YMCA.
Hmm?
YMCA.
The YMCA. And a man in the YMCA led him to Christ. And he wrote me a letter right away about his salvation. And I showed it to my Army buddies, and I laughed about it. I said, hey, I got a Holy Joe in the family. And I just, I couldn't believe that he'd made that kind of a decision. Because although I was a member of the church, I don't think I really had accepted Christ as a personal savior. I had religion, but I didn't have Christianity. And anyway, as a result of that letter, I came under conviction. So I searched for the Lord for quite a while. And one particular night, a young man came to our church youth group after the church service, and the youth group always met after the worship service. And he gave his testimony. And I just had to talk to him about what happened. And I went in and talked to him. We went to a little room off the side of the basement room there in the church, and he led me to Christ.
Hmm.
And I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just felt a real peace with the presence of the Lord in my life. And got on the bus, drove back out to the base, and this was September 25th, 1955. And I reached in my pocket and got out my Bull Durham and my papers so I could roll me a cigarette, because at the end of the month, I didn't have any money left. So I had to roll my own. And the Lord said to me in my mind, no, if you're going to be a Christian, that's one of the things that has to go. So I looked around, didn't see any empties, threw the tobacco away. And I had been trying to quit a couple of times.
Wow.
Quit smoking. Couldn't do it. But the Lord took the desire away completely after that night. I used to swear terribly. And I wondered, well, what's going to happen now? I was working in the motor pool on my 4x4. And I said, well, I put in some spark plugs, wrench slip, skinned my knuckles. And you know what I said? Ouch! Almost cried, because otherwise, before that night when I accepted Christ, I would not have said ouch. I would have turned the air blue with my language. Oh, when the Bible says, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things passed away, all things become new. And it really did in my life. This was the beginning of my salvation experience, and the way that I began to follow him.
Wow.
The church that we joined, I joined, JoAnn was already a member there, had a deaf ministry. And first time I saw that, excuse me, that lady down there waving her arms around, I said, what's wrong with her? She's interpreting the service for those people who are in front of her, and they're all deaf. Oh, well, the Lord led us then into, well, that lady had a heart attack, and so she couldn't interpret any longer. Two of the young people who were members of our youth group didn't know sign language. They interpreted for a while. Then the gal was going off to college. The guy was getting out of the army, going back home to Indiana. There was nobody there. There would be nobody there to take over. So the Lord led JoAnn and I and 4 or 5 other young people to go to the home of the deaf lady, who was the Sunday school teacher, and she taught us the sign language. And that was the beginning of our ministry with deaf people.
Now, were you just out of the service at this time, or
No,
were you still in service?
I was still in service at this time.
Gotcha. And so was this a large church to have a deaf ministry? Normally you would think that'd be a large church, right?
First Baptist Church in Columbus, Georgia. Yes, it was
Okay.
a large church. Don't remember the name of the pastor at this time, but it was a large church,
Okay.
and had a very active youth group. And we were active with that youth group. So that was the
Amazing.
beginning of my walk with Christ.
Wow.
And from there, I started searching for where to go to college. And I prayed that particular week that I needed to know where I was going to go to college when I got out of the Army. I went to, what was the name of that restaurant? Had the
Waffle
five-
House, no, Waffle House, Crystal Donut, Crystal Hamburgers.
Crystal Hamburgers. It's in the South. They don't have it around here, but they have it in the South. That was in Columbus, Georgia. And I sat at the counter and got my glass of milk and a couple of hamburgers, a couple of donuts. And the guy came and sat down beside me, put his Bible up on the counter, and I don't remember what his introductory words were. But I guess at that point I had made my decision for Christ, and it was a Schofield Bible. And I said, I like your Schofield Bible. And we got it talking. And I told him that I had recently been saved and that I was planning to go to college. He said, where are you going? I said, I really don't know. Been praying about it. I said, I'll tell you where to go. You go over here to Howard College in Birmingham, Alabama, which was a Southern Baptist college. And so we got talking, and I said, well, the Lord just answered my prayer, didn't he? So I contacted Howard College, and to make a long story short, that's where I ended up.
Wow. Wow. Now, JoAnn, we need to get caught up with you a little bit before Neal goes too much further. Because I got a feeling you're gonna probably enter the picture here shortly, I think.
Well, it's interesting that most people in our church talk about growing up in a Christian home. My dad was from Belfast, Ireland. His parents were charter members of a Presbyterian church. So he remembers telling stories about the priest coming to his house. But when he came to America, one of the things that he wanted his children to do was to go to church. But he worked every Sunday, and my mother worked every Sunday. So as far as I can remember, my parents never went with us to church. But I had an older sister, two older sisters, one 8 years older and one 4 years older than me, and I was the baby. But he made sure we went to church every Sunday. And when I was 10 years old, I felt the Lord calling me out of the pew to go down and make a profession of faith, knowing nothing about the Christian faith or anything, just feeling that tugging from the Lord. And so I did, and was baptized, and really did not know much about the Christian faith at that point in my life. But when I was 15, 16, we moved to Pensacola. That was in Columbus, Georgia, First Baptist Church, Columbus. We moved to Pensacola, Florida, my junior year of high school. And one of my best friends there was named Nora Brown. I will never forget her, because she introduced me to what it meant to be surrendered to the Lord and to have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And even though I knew my baptism was real, I knew that the Lord had led me that night, but it wasn't until I made that surrender to the Lord that I felt I really began to grow in my Christian life. And I began to talk to my dad and my mom about their faith. And my dad was 50 when I was born, and he kept saying, I'm too old, and he had a lot of excuses. But at that point in my life, when I had surrendered, I felt that God was calling me to be a nurse in Africa, the mission. You know,
Wow.
that's all that women did back then. You were a nurse and you went to Africa as a missionary. So I contacted the Foreign Mission Board and began the process of filling out forms that when I went through my college, they told me what I had to do with college and so forth, and was preparing for that. Then my senior year, my folks moved back to Columbus to continue the work that they had been doing. And my dad would come to church with me occasionally, but not often. But it was there that I got introduced to the deaf ministry. And as Neal said, I was one of 5 that went to the home of a deaf lady to learn sign language. Still just, I only did it because one of my friends went with me, and her name was Jeanette, and she encouraged me, and it was just a fun thing to do. So, but I was still, my mind set on going to the foreign mission field, and went to Mercer University after I graduated, and had a full scholarship from the WMU at First Baptist in Macon, Georgia, if I would start a deaf ministry there. And again, that it was of the Lord. And it was one night in chapel at Mercer University, as I was listening to some Christian music, that the Lord spoke to me, and I started crying. And he said that the deaf ministry was my ministry, not Africa, not a nurse in Africa, but the deaf ministry. And I think I realized that because there had been no deaf ministry anywhere in Macon. And when I began to work with First Baptist in Macon, Georgia, would go and visit the deaf people. And when you find one, they would tell you about somebody else, but they would just break into this huge smiles when they found somebody that could communicate with them. because they had no way of going to church at that time. So I began a Sunday school class, taught some sign language classes to some of my friends at Macon. And when Neal and I got engaged, they took over, and the lady that took over, Gloria, took over the class there, and she and her husband became missionaries also. And actually, they're living in Florida now. And she and I had a conversation recently last year, found her on Google or something. But Neal and I got married in 1957, and he was by then pastor for the deaf in Birmingham, Alabama, and we were there in ministry. But all of the years that I prayed for my dad and my mom, but my mom said that she had accepted the Lord, but she just was always working.
Right.
But my dad finally, after years and years of witnessing to him, we were living here in Wake Forest and had friends come and talk to him about the Lord. And at 89 years old, he accepted the Lord and was baptized.
Wow.
And tears of joy just flooded us, because he would sit after that and preach to us around the dinner table about what the Lord had told him during the day. By then, his eyesight was bad and his hearing was bad, but he'd said, "You think I'm sitting there asleep in the recliner, but the Lord has been talking to me all this time," and he would tell us what the Lord said. The Lord really did a work in his life, and that was one of the joys of my life, to see my parents come to the Lord.
Wow.
That sort of brings us up to the time we got married.
So the way the two of you met was in Columbus, Georgia, at that church, because y'all were one of the 5 youth who went and visited the deaf person.
We
Was that-
did.
Wow.
Right.
And I'll tell you some funny stories about us. When the other two people left, and Neal and I took up, quote, we said signing, not interpreting, signing in church. We made some really funny mistakes, which I used to tell the interpreters. So you will make mistakes, but laugh at yourself. But I remember one Sunday, one of the deaf ladies asked me if she used this sign, which you can't see, but now it means sweetheart. But she asked if Neal and I were sweethearts, and I didn't know what it meant, so I just said yes. And we weren't even dating at the time. He knew the sign, and he started laughing. He said, "We are." But then we laugh about Neal interpreting scripture. The scripture was, "Come unto me, and I will give you rest." And Neal's son, "Come unto me, and I'll give you a baby." And all the deaf started laughing.
Now, the sign for rest is your arms on top of each other. The sign for baby, they're just the opposite. You turn them over with your palms up like you're rocking a baby. And so it's very close. It was easy to mix up, at least it was for me.
Learning together. But during those years in high school, the Lord, we were not only involved, I was a senior in high school. And like he said, he had come to know the Lord, and we were involved in prison ministry. We were involved in home Bible studies, Youth for Christ. We had some great leaders. The doctor in our church, Dr. Henry Webb, his wife taught training union, and she was probably one of the major influences on my life as a youth, how to live for Christ on Sunday nights in training union. It really meant, so when I went off to college, I was strong in my faith because of teachings from my church and the studies and the Bible studies. Taught a Bible study in high school. We could do that back then, and had some great Christian friends. But I was so grateful, because I remember even arguing with my religion professor at Mercer University about some of the scripture he was teaching that I didn't think was right. And we would go over the Bible, and I'd get my Bible and I'd say, "Look, this is what it says."
Wow.
I had some great influences growing up that helped me in my faith.
Now, did you study nursing when you were at Mercy?
No, I decided I'd do, a master in education, knowing I would not be a teacher, but both the Home Mission Board and Foreign Mission Board at that time said I had to have 2 years of college in order to qualify as missionaries. And we had felt that the God would call us to be missionaries with the deaf. At that time, North American Mission Board was hiring missionaries to the deaf, but I still had to have the 2 years. So I transferred to Birmingham. Howard is now Sanford College, Sanford University. But when the years we were there, it was still called Howard. But the year that he graduated became Sanford University.
Okay.
But I finished my 2 years and then got pregnant with our first child and thought I would go back after that, but never did. But I did have my 2 years, and we were ordained by the North American Mission Board as missionaries to the deaf.
At that time, it was a Home Mission Board.
Yeah. And we were, I don't know if you call it commissioned, I guess is the word, both at Glorietta and at North Carolina at the Ridgecrest Baptist.
Ridgecrest.
So, and that was in 1963 when we were commissioned with the Home Mission Board, served for 25 years with the Home Mission Board.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Neal, JoAnn mentioned, her having a strong call to be a missionary to the deaf. I don't know that we got that out of your story yet, but I know you were part of that youth group that went to work with the deaf lady or the deaf family, but when did you feel like this was going to be your calling?
I think as soon as I started learning sign language, I felt like that's what God wanted me to do, is to become a missionary to the deaf.
Yeah.
And so I had applied to the Home Mission Board. I was interested in becoming a missionary with them. And they sent me back the papers to fill out, and I did. And as JoAnn said, we were commissioned by them to work with them, and I worked with them for, I think, 25 years. I went to Howard College, which is now Stanford University. And then from there, I went to seminary in Kansas City for 1 year, just 1 year, 1 year in Kansas City, and then moved to Southeastern till I graduated in 1963 from Southeastern. At the time when I moved to North Carolina from Missouri, I moved here to work with Jerry Potter, who was missionary to the deaf for the North Carolina Baptist Convention. And I was to work with him as a co-missionary. And then when I graduated in '63, they put me on full time with the North Carolina Baptist Convention. And I worked with the North Carolina Baptist Convention for 38 years. But they kept adding stuff to me. I was just working with the deaf to start with. Then they added the work with, let's see, trying to remember what came next first. The blind and the mentally handicapped. And then they added church and community ministries. And then they added handyman ministries. And then literacy missions. So I ended up with 6 different areas of ministry with the convention at one time.
How about that? So y'all got married before you went to Howard or while you were at Howard?
Well, he was at Howard and then we got married and I transferred to Howard.
Okay.
So we will celebrate 65 years of marriage this year.
I was getting ready to ask that next. 65 years. Wow.
Yeah.
She still puts up with me.
I'm telling you.
She's a brave lady.
Now, tell us a little bit about maybe your family as you were during those years.
Well, let's see. Mike was born in Birmingham. He was our first child. And the funny story I like to tell about that, we were married in 1957, and Neal was often speaking to WU groups and so forth, and he was speaking to a group in 1959 before we moved to Kansas City, and one of the churches, this wonderful group of elder ladies from WMU And he said, we were married in 1958, and Mike was born in 1957. And I said, wait a minute, Neil, I think you got those dates backwards. And all the ladies had a big kick out of that. But I was born in 1958. And then we moved to Kansas City, and Philip was born there. We moved to North Carolina, and Stephen was born.
So
And
we decided, we found out what was causing all those kids. And we didn't move anymore, and we haven't had any more kids.
I'll tell you, that fixed that problem, didn't it?
we had 3 sons. So.
Very good. Very good.
Stephen, the last son, was mentally handicapped, lives in a group home in Raleigh, and is very happy in that group home. We bring him home every couple of weeks, or before COVID, we did, and for a visit. And sometimes we'd keep him home for 2 or 3 days. And it got so that after the first day, he was packing his clothes in his suitcase and signing home. He's nonverbal, by the way, but he knows sign
Okay.
language.
Okay.
He knows, we figure probably 150 words in sign language. So he would sign home. And so we decided we weren't keeping him home for his benefit. We were keeping him home for our benefit because we felt guilty as parents that he wasn't living here with us. And so we started taking him back when he was ready to go back.
But the interesting thing, Joe, how God works is people often ask us if we learned sign language because of Stephen.
Oh. Yeah.
But God prepared us because when Stephen was less than a year old, we started taking him to what then was called the Birth Defects Clinic at Chapel Hill. And he had a speech therapist. And she told us to teach him that he would learn to talk. We could play games and teach him how to talk. And we tried. I spent hours trying to teach him to talk, and he learned a few labial sounds, but never really was able to talk. But one day, sitting on the floor with him, when he was about 3 years old, and he was often banging his head on the floor and on the wall, knew it was frustration. But I signed to him, I love you, and he signed back, love you.
Wow.
And I started crying, and I signed it again, and he signed it again. And so we began to teach him some simple signs to communicate. Water, cookie, bed, tired, mom, dad, brothers, and
Tricycle.
tricycle, yeah.
He loved his tricycle.
But the speech therapist at that time said, don't do that. That's a crutch for him. And we said, well, we're sorry. But he has stopped his frustration. He can communicate now. And so I think the Lord prepared us for Stephen. Though
Right.
when Stephen was a child, he was sick and in and out of the hospital and really not expected to live. He had a tracheotomy when he was 11 months old, and the doctor told me he wouldn't live through the surgery, but he did, and he's now 56 years old.
Mm.
But he's had a lot of traumatic things in these years, but he's healthier now than we probably are. So God knows. But it was one of those days when he had suffered so much. And Neil was away in the western part of the state doing a funeral. He had bronchitis. He was 11 months old, a relapse. I took him to the hospital, and they wouldn't let me stay because he was in the nursery. And I had Philip with me at 4 years old, and I came home. I'd been home 30 minutes, and they called and said Stephen had quit breathing, and it happened, quote, that there was a doctor there, and they put a tube down his throat because they were going to do a tracheotomy. And I might want to get back over there to be there when they did the surgery because they didn't think he would live. Couldn't reach Neil because he was no cell phones back then. And on the way over, I remember crying and praying, Lord, I hate to see Stephen continue to suffer like he suffered, but I cannot just give him up, Lord. And he's just in your hands, whatever. By the time I arrived at the hospital, I had cried all the way over there, but by the time I arrived, I had perfect peace about whatever was going to happen to Stephen. And Neil came in, had to do 4 television programs that night, couldn't stay with me at the hospital. And I told him I was fine, and I really was. And I just look on things like that as God gives you what you need when you need it.
Yeah.
You know, but you have to surrender it sometimes. And the same thing when our oldest son died. That was, I felt like I was dying. But when Mike died, I remember getting on my knees and surrendering that to him as well, and feeling God's peace just flood me from head to toe. And I told Neal it was hard to unexplain to anybody that he took away the burdens of the grief, but left the grief, so that I could still grieve, but I didn't have the burden where I felt like I was dying.
Wow.
There's so many incidents of God's work in our lives through the years that it just continues to amaze me how God is always there for us when we need it.
And she didn't mention why Mike died. Mike had brilliant kid. High IQ. In fact, he's high, period. He was 6'5".
Wow.
That's really tall for my family, because my family hardly ever got past 5, 10, or 11. But anyway, he got involved with drugs, and he died of a drug overdose. And,
that was not when people talked about it, but it was one of those things when people in the church rallied around us. Don and Kay Cook sent flowers, and other people did so much for us and supported us. Just call and say, we love you, we're thinking about you. And that's when your church family really means a lot to you.
and they really did give us a lot of support. Well, I guess at least 3 pews were made up of his friends, all in their leathers. And of course, they rode a motorcycle. Well, I didn't tell you that, but Mike had a Harley Davidson, and he was a member of a group that did a lot of riding. And they wanted to lead the hearse to the cemetery. We said, no, you can follow us, but you're not going to lead us. And so they did. They all of them followed us. There must have been probably 15 Harley Davidson.
Wow.
And they got out there, parked in their part, and they were hurting too, because Mike was a really great friend to them.
Yeah.
It was a part of it. It was a sort of a family thing for all the motorcyclists. But several of them came to know Christ as Savior after Mike died.
Wow.
We had the chance to witness to them and share with them.
An interesting story is that came out of that. One of my friends said she never thought about motorcycle people having mothers and dads too. So, but and that church was packed for the day of Mike's funeral there, and we saw people in their suits and ties putting their arms around these young people who were crying and didn't know the Lord, and they were ministering to them. And these young people came to our house quite often and said, Mike always told us if we had anything, we could come to you, and we need to know. And so God gave us a lot of opportunities to share with them, but it was a blessing.
Now, were you at Wake Forest Baptist Church when this happened? Okay,
Yeah.
so how long have y'all been members at Wake Forest Baptist Church?
Forever and ever. 1965.
Really? Okay.
We
Gosh.
came here in 1961, but we were members at Forestville Baptist Church for a few years, and Neal was ordained at Forestville Baptist Church.
Okay.
When our children were little, we moved back to Wake Forest Baptist so that because he was traveling a lot every Sunday, and I needed to be where I could get to church easy. So we moved to Wake Forest Baptist in 1965.
Well, when you mentioned that you were with the mission board for 25 years.
Right.
So you were still pretty young whenever that 25 years was over, right?
Well, that was a joint thing later, wasn't it?
Well, when I was, let's see, I'm trying to remember, I was 63 when I started seminary.
No, you
Well,
graduated.
graduated, I was 63 when I graduated.
Excuse me.
So, and I had been working part-time with the Home Mission Board while I went to seminary. And then they put me on full-time when I graduated in 63.
But we stayed with the Home Mission Board. They were paying his salary through the convention for many years. And then finally the state convention took over paying his salary after 25 years, well, a little over 25 years. But we do have our 25-year pin from the Home Mission Board. But then he stayed on the convention for 38 years altogether.
Oh, 38 years. Okay. Wow. Wow. How about that?
And Philip, our middle son.
Yes,
We
yes.
tend to forget him because he's always been such a blessing and still is, but Mike was always, we were hurting with him. And then with Stephen's situation, he was sick so much and in and out of the group home and just a lot going on with that situation. And I even apologized to Philip not long ago for, hope he never felt neglected because of being in the middle sometimes. But he went to the Naval Academy, graduated, married a local girl, Claire McLeod,
Right.
Jean and Beth, and they'd known each other since they were 4 years old and best friends, and used to say they were like brother and sister until they discovered the Lord had more for them than brother and sister. But they've been married 39 years, and they have 3 children and now 3 granddaughters, and we have 3 great-granddaughters. So, but Philip, really, all of those years, he was there for Mike and there for Stephen, both of those. Mike used to pick up Stephen and bring him home, and Mike, when I hear of other parents, the Lord has given me opportunities to minister to a lot of parents whose children have died with opioid drug overdose. But when I hear their stories, I realize how blessed we were, even with Mike's involvement in that. And he never used bad language around us, anything. He was, in many ways, just the kindest, most loving person. And at his funeral, I had older people my age come to me and tell me how much Mike had done for them, physically helping them, helping out, that we never knew about. He was always doing something to help others. And this is actually how he got involved in drugs. But you never get over it. You never get over it.
Yeah, actually, he got involved in handyman ministry before I did.
Huh.
He did.
Wow.
Just because he enjoyed doing that. In fact, he helped me build the deck on the back of our house in 1984. And so he was a good carpenter. He was involved in stringing wire for television, cable television, and just a lot of different things.
Yeah.
He went to Wake Tech and graduated there, and
4.0 average.
the professors there wanted him to go into civil engineering or electrical engineering. But he didn't, that wasn't his thing, so. But,
He wanted to work outside, so he did. And that's good.
yeah.
Now, where do Philip and Claire live?
Warrenton, Virginia.
Warrenton, Virginia. Okay.
It's not far from Manassas.
Okay. Kind of up around the Northern Virginia area.
Mhm.
He's about 25 miles, I think, from DC. He works in DC. And so we have to drive in back and forth every day. When he first moved up there, I think it took him 30 minutes. Now he can't make it in less than an hour because of all the development.
Sort of like
Right.
Raleigh, isn't it? Wake Forest and Raleigh.
Yeah,
Probably, maybe even a little worse up there.
yeah, I'm sure.
No.
Well, let's maybe transition over a little bit to talk a little bit about some of the things you folks are involved in the church today. I know that you guys are so active. I'm sure there's not many things you haven't done, but what are some of the things that you're actively involved in doing at our church now?
Well, basically, I work with the handyman ministry, and excuse me, as you're aware, they built a ramp yesterday. I was signed up to build it with them, but I've been developing a little bit of problem with my back, and so I had to call and get off that work. But they had a really good crew working out there, and they completed the job, I think, by, what did they tell me, by 4 o'clock that afternoon. And it was a big ramp that they built. But Ed Stansel and Alan Overton, Tommy Killebrew, and Larry Bowles.
Hmm.
There was 4 that I remember that were on that, but there were several others.
You just rotated off as a deacon for 3 years. We're involved in the Tuesday night prayer group. Have
Okay.
been 3 years.
I think Kathy, my wife, was telling me she was involved, you and her were in a group together with the women's Bible study. So I think you're active in that.
Yeah.
The deaf ministry that you led and developed at our church, I know currently we're in a little bit of a break,
Right.
but man, what a ministry that has been in our church. I mean,
Interesting.
I learned how to sign the doxology thanks to you folks. That's the only thing I know how to do, but I do know how to do the doxology.
It's so hard for me to sit in church now and not sign the doxology.
I know. You're exactly right.
But it's interesting that Faye Choplin started coming to church when she was 16 years old. We didn't have a deaf ministry, and I would sit on the back pew with her and sign to her. And she was so embarrassed that she wouldn't come very often. But when Shauna Batchford started coming, Tom Jackson approached us about starting a deaf ministry. And so Shauna was actually the impetus to Tom said, well, let's have a deaf ministry. So I agreed to teach a sign language course. At that point, I had been working in the community as a professional interpreter since the 1970s. And this was in the 1990s. So I taught the sign language class, and I think as Sherry mentioned, she and Tammy Hayes and Karen and TJ were the 4 that stayed with it. Now there were several that taken, and we have taught many sign language classes, but those 4 stayed with it, and that's how the deaf ministry began, because Tom Jackson really wanted to open up the church to anybody that could come and to have a ministry for them. So that was really a blessing. But as it was getting close, I think Sherry mentioned this, it was getting close to the time for Neal to retire, and we wanted to travel together. And so I used to warn him that now, if we do this, you're going to have responsibility. But somehow I never got out of it. I still said with it, but it was really a blessing, especially to see the way that the Lord put his hand on Sherry and Tammy and Karen and TJ to lead them into ministry. Because I think I learned sign language as a high school, and I really prayed that the Lord would lead some of our youth to take up the ministry, and that's why we taught so many classes. But we just never had that interest. The Lord never led anybody else to take it up. But we don't know what he has in the future. So.
Well, there's been a lot of people ministered to through that ministry, and many of us can speak, and we were ministered to. Like I said, learning the doxology, you folks ministered to all of us, in one way or the other. Certainly informed us and raised our level of sensitivity. So you were a blessing in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
How about
that
go ahead.
Growing when my kids were little and Neal was traveling a lot, I taught GAs and RAs, and mission friends and taught a
Uh-huh.
Sunday school class and then taught the youth. Was chair of the stewardship committee. I think I served on every committee in there, even finally as a deacon, but my love was always with the deaf ministry. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate what we've been able to serve, how we've been able to serve the Lord there, and look forward to what he has for us in the future.
Amazing. Let me ask, one of the questions I like to ask people is if they have any type of spiritual practices or routines or, things that they do maybe regularly that just kind of help keep them in the word and keep them in, kind of in God's presence, keep them in a worshiping state. I mean, in addition to obviously going to church, are there other things that you do that you have found helpful that you would share?
We both always want to start off the day spending at least 45 minutes to an hour in Bible study, prayer, study of other types of materials, devotional materials. So we make a habit to start the day off with the Lord.
Yeah.
And some of the books that I have found really meaningful to me were A.W. Tozer. You may be familiar with that name and may not be familiar with that, but he has two books that really meant a lot to me. The Divine Conquest and The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer, Tozer. And then The Kneeling Christian by an Unknown Christian has been a very meaningful book too. And then the Barclay's Commentaries, a whole series of Barclay's commentaries, because they're written on a level that I can understand. And so I like those. And then the Simple Sermon series by Herschel Ford, who is pastor of First Baptist Church, El Paso, Texas. These have been some of my important devotional materials.
Yeah. JoAnn, anything else that you would add to that? Things that you have found helpful?
Yes, I do like Max Lucado and David Jeremiah a lot, but early on, prayer has always been very important to me. And Evelyn Christensen was one of the ladies that really influenced my life, her books. And I had another lady called Jennifer Dean, who has written a lot about prayer and what it means to be in prayer and persevere in prayer. And I've had the opportunity to hear her in person. And she really has touched me with her insights into prayer. And so those have been some of the books that Neal, I've read the books that Neal just mentioned, Tozer and some of the others. And through the years, we have read a lot of books on Christian living, and try to do that all the time. But I think, as Neal said, I really thing that means the most is those early morning, that hour. Sometimes it goes to an hour and a half. We just get involved in prayer and reading and that quiet time with the Lord. And so because we're retired, if we don't eat breakfast till 9 o'clock, that's okay. So,
we can do it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But
How about a favorite Bible verse or a favorite hymn?
My favorite Bible verse is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6.
Oh,
Trust in the Lord. You know that one by heart, I'm sure. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not under your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. That's my favorite verse.
yeah.
but the verse that the man used to lead you to the Lord was, you're saved by grace. Yeah. And that's always been meaningful to you too.
Yeah. Not by works, but by grace. That was my favorite song, I guess, is Victory in Jesus.
By the way, Joe, he's already said we have to sing that at his funeral.
There we go. There we go. JoAnn, you have a favorite Bible verse or a favorite hymn?
I think probably Romans 8:28, because of the many things that have happened in our ministry, with Stephen's illness, with Mike's death, with Stephen being in a group home, with Philip's call to the Naval Academy and how that happened, but the good and the bad. And the night that Mike died, we got the call at midnight from the police department, and we were in shock, and we had some quiet time between us after that, and just trying to absorb what was going on. And the Lord spoke to me in those quiet hours, early morning, 2, 3 in the morning, with a Bible verse, Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping endureth for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I argued with the Lord, laying there in bed, and I said, Lord, that'll never happen. Mike's my firstborn, my love, and there'll never be any more joy, Lord. So I was arguing with the Lord about that. And the next morning, sometime around mid-morning, I got a call from a young girl I had taught in youth, and she's now married and living in South Carolina. And you may or may not remember the Bobos that lived in town. He was at the seminary, but their daughter I had taught, and she's now married in South Carolina, and her name's Margaret Bobo Fober. And she called me and she said, and because I knew Margaret, she said, JoAnn, I've been on my knees for 2 hours asking the Lord to give me something to share with you. And she said, this will sound strange, but this is what the Lord has asked me to tell you. Weeping endureth for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I started laughing, Joe. And she said, why are you laughing? I said, because I've been arguing with the Lord about that verse all night long. And to have him confirm that verse. And I've got it marked in my Bible, and I also have it marked the day that he gave me back my joy and took away the sorrow. And so there are lots of verses that thing, but Romans 8:28 has been that steadfast that whatever we go through, God's going to bring good out of it.
Yeah.
Then my favorite song, one of my favorite songs, and that I won't sing at my funeral, is To God Be the Glory. I just love that song because of its message.
Yeah.
And that's really.
She's already tried to tie up one of the men in our church who was in the choir to sing that at her funeral.
Well, switching gears one more time, what do Neal and JoAnn do for fun?
Well, we used to do a lot of things when we were younger, but we used to love to backpack, to camp, to hike, and woodwork. That's my thing is woodworking, gardening, and walk. We used to walk anywhere from 3 to 5 miles a day. And now with neuropathy in my feet, I can't do that. And
we still try to walk.
but we still get out and walk. I say we don't walk anymore, we shuffle, but we get out there and move.
One of the things about backpacking, I was a city girl and never knew anything about camping or hiking, but Neal got me into backpacking and I loved it. And we backpack in the North Carolina mountains, the Santa Fe mountains, the Colorado mountains.
And Wyoming.
And loved it. So,
And then we've done at least three canoe trips up in the Boundary Waters.
Oh,
Out of Ely, Minnesota, you go up into the Canadian waters,
right.
With canoes. We've done at least 3 trips on that.
but now, as he said, we don't do those things anymore. We worked with disaster relief for 20 years after he retired, and did all sorts of recovery work, feeding, childcare. We've traveled from California to Texas to North Carolina to Florida to the Pentagon. We had some amazing experiences working with disaster relief. And I think the thing that touched me the most was working at the Pentagon right after 9/11, while they were still pulling dead bodies out of the Pentagon. And I just cried every night. But it was just so amazing to be able to be there for people. But that was an amazing experience. But now I just like to stay home and read and bake and walk and just be in my Bible study. So, yeah. But God has blessed us in so many ways, and we are so grateful. Grateful.
Wow. What else should we talk about as we start wrapping up here? Is there anything else that you would want to share related to your faith journey in the past, currently, future? Anything else that we haven't touched on that you would want to share?
I would just encourage from my own experience that nothing that you go through is outside of God's care. Just trust Him. And that was the emphasis for me with the Lord when Mike died, is that I don't understand it, but I trust Him. And I think that would be something I would say to people in the good things and the bad things. Just trust the Lord. Deepen your relationship with the Lord, and let Him minister to you, and let Him do His work in you and give Him the glory. Not us, but Him.
And I would ditto that.
Yeah. You folks just epitomize for me being good Christian stewards. You've lived a life of service, selfless service, and yet you've had more than your share of challenges. And it kind of makes you almost think that only through God would all this have been possible. What a testimony. What a testimony.
God is.
He's been so good. He really has.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't believe in coincidence. We just see God at work all the time. And even I used to say, oh, there's interruptions in the day. And then I say, but Lord, these are opportunities you're giving us today. So to look at it from His viewpoint.
Yeah.
And prayer has been a real vital part of our life. I tell one story just to show that sometimes we miss or can miss the Lord's answer to prayer. When Mike was having problems with his drugs and actually was in jail for a while, and I was talking to somebody, and they said, well, if you got a job for him, he can get out. So I said, well, how am I going to get him a job? I started calling people around town. You got any work that Mike could do? And everybody I talked to, no, not at all. And every day I drove back and forth to work from Wake Forest to Cary, because the Baptist building was in Cary. And I kept seeing these trucks, Watson Electric Construction Company. And I got thinking, those trucks have been out here every morning, all the years that I've driven back and forth. Why haven't I noticed them? And so I said, well, I'm going to get the phone book out. I called them up and I explained what I needed. He said, yeah, we often hire people who are in prison who can get out and do this kind of work, and to give them a job. I said, I almost missed that answer to prayer. God didn't answer the way I thought He would. He just helped me recognize that these trucks have been out here all that time, and I had never seen them until I prayed, Lord, I need a job for Mike. And that's the way it worked out.
Wow.
But sometimes we pray and think God should answer this way or that way or the other way. But He doesn't. He answers His way. So always keep your mind open to the way God may be answering your prayer.
And I would emphasize, even in the little things, pray about the little things. Some people say you can't pray about just losing something, but you can. And when we were first married, somebody gave us a washer and we couldn't figure out how to hook it to the sink. And Neal prayed about it, and that night he had a dream and got up the next morning and fit right in. But that emphasizes so many times that we hear people say, well, I pray about the big things, but God's not interested in the little things. And God is interested in
everything.
Sometimes we pray and we forget to listen.
Yeah.
You're right.
You're right.
Yeah. Speaking about prayer, let's close by, let me ask you this, is that, anybody listening to this, myself included, what is it we can pray for you?
I guess one of the things that we particularly are concerned about at this point is our son lives in a group home in Raleigh. That group home has been shut down because of repairs that need to be done, mold under the basement in the crawl space. And they have been out of that home now for 2 months, living in either hotels or now they're finally into an apartment, a 2-room apartment. And there's 6 guys in the group home. And they tell us they probably won't be back into the group home until the 1st of March. So pray that those guys that are supposed to be doing the remodeling work, get in there and get it done so that all these group home guys can be back in a friendly home environment.
But the other part about that is that all the group homes right now are in lockdown because not Stephen's group home, but some of the others have COVID clients and staff, and they're locked down also. We can't even go to visit right now.
Yeah.
But just praying that nobody else will develop COVID from that. And I think too, just for our health and recognizing what the God has for us in the future. Like we said, we don't do disaster relief anymore. We don't do a lot of things, but just still finding opportunities to serve him the best we can in whatever way he leads us, and we'll be open to that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being such good role models for the rest of us. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for sharing about your faith journey. I'm sure God will use this in some way. We're going to certainly give it to him and let him do what he wants with it. But it's really been great spending a little bit of time, hearing about your story. I had told Neal earlier that I remember him telling me a little bit about his story in the Army, about God taking away his desire to smoke. I don't know where we were, Neal, but I just remember you telling me that story. But I really, I really didn't know a lot about your story. And I think that's one of the challenges as our church gets larger is, people don't take the time or don't have the time to really sit down and listen to each other and hear our stories and realize, there's so much that God can work through people's stories. So hopefully you'll continue to do that through this story. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you for the opportunity.